Well, hello, it's Dr. Jack with today's Life Brief. Today it's my message to graduating residents and fellows. Now, if you're not a graduating resident or fellow, I think you'll benefit in any case. I had a really great time putting my thoughts down on paper related to this topic. There are three topics I want to cover today. One is, what are the greatest challenges when you become a new attending? Number two, what are the time, financial, and focus possibilities on your new job? And number three, how should you best use your remaining time in your training program? Let's begin. So the first one is, what are the greatest challenges? Well, I think there are a couple. The first one is that you will likely experience a relative feeling of isolation. For most people graduating from a training program, you've been in school or training your entire life. From preschool to kindergarten, grammar school, high school, college, medical school, training program, you've been surrounded by peers your entire life. There's always someone working alongside you at the same level of education or training. When you become an attending, that may no longer be the case. Maybe there will be other attendings in your specialty, but perhaps not. Perhaps you'll be the only psychiatrist, for example, in that entire clinic or in that multi-specialty group practice. Or maybe you're starting your own practice. So that sense of isolation. So one suggestion I have for you is now, while you're still in training, talk to each other about this and decide to keep in touch. For those of you staying in town, then you could get together in person. Maybe you can, kind of meet up at a local coffee shop on a Saturday or Sunday morning once a month. If you're leaving town, dispersing from the training program, you can have online meetups. Related to that, another part of that sense of isolation is, it's very easy to talk shop among your colleagues and get some curbside consults from your attendings or your fellow residents or fellows. When you go out there as a new attending, that becomes more rare. But you can even have some sort of group, kind of informal consultative sessions. I would keep it informal. I would share general medical advice. You're not there to be establishing a patient-physician relationship when you've never met that patient, but that's okay. You can speak informally. For example, I might say, I've got a patient on high dose of sertraline and she's about 50% improved, but we really need to do better. I was thinking of starting mirtazapine. Have you ever done that? Is that safe to do? Should I worry about serotonin syndrome? Give me some advice. Right? It could be very, very helpful to do that, to keep in touch in that way. I think another challenge when you become a new attending is you will really feel an increased sense or burden of responsibility. Now, remember when I graduated medical school, my first day on the job as a first-year resident boy, I felt that burden of responsibility. And the same thing was true again when I finished my residency program and became an attending. There's another level of, the buck really stops here with me. And interestingly enough, this can really hit home with the first self-pay patient that you see, where you realize that this person is paying maybe $350, $500, whatever it is, $600 out of pocket to be evaluated by you. And you start doubting yourself. Is my time, the benefit I'm offering, really worth that much money? This person isn't rich? Well, look, your new clinic may have a sliding scale. Patients who meet financial criteria could get, have a lower level of payment. But in general, you have to charge whatever the clinic charges. So you have to be worth that $350 or $500 an hour. And if you don't feel like you are, well, that's okay. You can get there. Keep learning. Go to conferences, read up. Every time you see a new patient, it's an opportunity to look up more detail about that disorder or whatever that kind of clinical scenario. So the challenge and it's a good challenge, is to, expand your clinical armamentarium so that when you see patients, you have a complete belief based on good evidence that the services that you offer are worth that amount of money that the patient's paying, and in fact, a whole lot more. Now, this is, of course, true for every patient. You have to do your best for every patient. I just brought up the self-pay because the first time you experience that, it really kind of brings home that point acutely. But of course, we have to do our best and do a great job for every patient. Now, let me segue to point number 2, right? So what are the financial, time, and focus possibilities when you finish your training program? One idea I think it could be very powerful is, look, when you start being an attending, your income is going to maybe double or quadruple. You're going to make a lot more money. So how about choosing an annual spend, a certain amount of lifestyle spending that you're going to have when you graduate, that's somewhere in between your current income and that income that you're going to have on your new job. So if you're going to make 3 times as much as what you're making now, let's say, you can spend twice as much and still have a lot of money left over. Just a thought. Just imagine the flexibility and the freedom you'll have if you minimize or avoid getting into that rat race, and where you can put aside, a substantial amount of money to save, to invest, so that you have that cushion. So you're not always having to work hard just to pay your mortgage, okay? Now, conversely, you have that same option with time. If someone offers you a job making, again, let's say 3 times what you're making now in your training program, maybe you don't have to work full-time to make 3 times as much. Maybe you can work part-time to make twice as much. Again, you have so much freedom, so much flexibility. I think one thing that always struck me from my experience in my training program, we never talked about this, we never thought about it. But I always want to stress that you have a lot more flexibility, a lot more power to decide what the right options are for you in your life. So imagine if you had this extra money put aside, or if you had this extra time that you were using not at your job. What could you do with that? What would be best for you to align with your life goals and your core values? That's the most important question to ask yourself. Think about yourself too. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where do you want to be? Maybe you want to have a family. Maybe you don't want to be working 80 hours a week. Or maybe you want to be working 80 hours a week now so that when the time comes, you can work less. So think about all these possibilities. Look at your career long term. And even right now, as you're probably interviewing for your first job, think about what's going to be right for you. Now, the clinic director or whoever you're talking with, you're interviewing with, they have to meet their own needs. There's a clinician shortage, a psychiatrist shortage. They probably want as much of you as they can get. But that's their job. That's their goal. Your goal may not necessarily align with that. But maybe there is a middle ground where both parties can work it out and will work out adequately for both parties. If not, then there are plenty of other institutions, clinics, practices, etc., that would be happy to have you. Okay? Now, the last thing I wanted to say about this is, as you go forward, and whether you're subspecializing or not, this applies to everyone. You can specialize in certain disorders or certain conditions, what have you, going forward. Some of the happiest psychiatrists I know are doctors who specialize. Like, I only treat patients with adult ADHD. I only treat women who are pregnant or thinking about becoming pregnant or are breastfeeding. I specialize in psychopharmacology for that patient population. Or perhaps I specialize in kids who are doubly gifted, kids with high intelligence, but also who have perhaps ADHD or are on the autism spectrum or have some other social behavioral issues. Maybe I specialize in really doing second opinions, where I only consult on patients who have failed treatment multiple times. Now think about that. When you specialize, you really get down deep. You really, really know what you're doing, right? It gives you that great sense of mastery. And people will search you out, not only from your hometown, but maybe from the entire country. I know doctors who have patients fly in from other countries to consult with them. They can always follow up through telemedicine, right? So you meet someone in person one or two times, then you could follow up through telemedicine, right? I like to point out that, the way things are right now, that your catchment area is the entire globe. It's powerful thought to consider. All right, now let me move on to the third point. The third point is, how do you best use your time, your remaining time in your training program? Well, I think number one is really appreciate that time. Really, it's a time of bonding with your peers, of feeling grateful, and of communicating that. I think one of my greatest growth experiences was during my residency. I was always very shy. I was not very forthcoming with my feelings of love and cherishment and appreciation with people. But my supervisors actually helped me become a little bit more communicative. And I found that to be, very, very gratifying in my life. And so the people you're with, that you're going to be leaving, this chapter that's going to be closing in your life, cherish them. Cherish the experiences you've had together. Feel grateful for everything that you've learned from them. And then let them know. The other thing I would say, and this is my last point, the other good way of spending your remaining time is to use treatments that you haven't used before. Now, for many doctors at the beginning of their careers, the medications they have not used are the older medications, the tricyclic antidepressants, the MAOIs, clozapine. This is a great time for you to try those medications. They're just awesomely powerful. They're great for use as second line or third line or even fourth line treatment. And you will have patients who will need those levels of treatment. It's very hard to start using a medication, especially the ones that have a higher adverse effect burden, on your own. It's great to use them when you're in a supportive atmosphere and you have a lot of people you can turn to for advice. So I would advise you to use those medications that you haven't tried yet, whatever they may be, obviously clinically appropriately. And also, the same thing with somatic treatments. If you've never assisted in a ECT or TMS session, then go ahead and do so. If you don't have them directly in your training program, talk to the training director. There are, I'm sure, places somewhere in your town that are offering those services and would not mind having a resident or a fellow come in and assist or at least observe. You can learn a lot from that. So this is Dr. Jack. Thank you so much. Please give me some feedback. Let me know if this has been at all helpful to you. I hope so. Signing off. You take care of yourself. Thank you.